I always recommend hiring from a place of abundance, not scarcity. Go into the hiring process knowing the right person's out there. Don't question it. But if you get to enough really good people that just can't make it through, then it might be the process. So I actually make it about the candidate. I get to know them. I learn more from people's questions in an interview than answers, because their answers are prepared. Their questions might not be as prepared. The questions show you what they truly value at the deeper level. I mean, I always say there's three kinds of candidates. There's builders, improvers, and maintainers. Maintainers, they keep the lights on. They keep the ship from sinking by plugging a hole. Improvers take something from A to Z, and builders create from scratch.
Mitch, welcome to the Made Leader podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks again for hosting me, Jen.
Absolutely. And for the audience, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Mitch McDermott. I'm the CEO and founder of Talent Ascension Group. We place mid-level executives at middle market, high growth businesses. I spent my entire career working with C-level executives, helping them bring in the right leadership team at the mid-level, and also working with mid-level leadership on how to build game-changing careers for themselves.
Well, then I'm sure you've got a good response to this, right? I ask every guest this, that what is the biggest lie we tell people about leadership?
Yeah, that leadership's about being in charge. I think leadership, when done right, is about radical responsibility. At the end of the day, leaders have the ultimate control who sits on their team, right? It's easy to blame others. Oh, we didn't hit our number because this person or this person didn't do what they were supposed to. But at the end of the day, the leader has a choice that who's sitting on the bus and where they sit. And I think radical responsibility is really what leadership is about. And also that it's not just a title that's given to you, it's a right that's earned. I think you can lead by influence because you have authority through title, but you're going to burn out a lot of people and you're probably going to lose a lot of good people. I think the right leaders lead because they naturally become somebody that other people want to follow.
Yeah. Well, going back to the radical responsibility, is that similar to like Jocko's radical responsibility? You know what I'm talking about? Jocko Willink?
I do. It's similar. Yeah. I think, at the end of the day, right, there's two ways to look at it. It's the victim mentality that things happen to me, or the ownership mentality of, things happen for me. And it's even a lesson I personally had to learn when starting a company, because it took us a while to get the business off the ground, and it was easy to see the people who weren't performing. And I ultimately came to the realization that it's my choice if they have a place here or not. If we're not performing, it's my job as a CEO and leader to make sure we have the right people on the bus first and foremost. And if we don't, then I need to make those changes.
Yes, it is. It is tough because oftentimes leaders do inherit a team and they may not always be the right people. So you have to make that call and give them a chance, but then determine if they're going to be a good job fit or not. And it comes with the hiring process, right? So we don't always make the right hire. And I know I've had to hire people in the past. It's really tough. I think it's really tough for new leaders. So what are some common hiring mistakes? You can say that new leaders or just leaders in general make.
Yeah, I think a really common thing I see is assumptions. And it ties into something that, we can talk about more for this answer, which is they interview the resume, not the person. It's easy to look at a resume and make judgments. But I always advise people, the resume almost never tells the full story. Just because it doesn't have one word on the job description doesn't mean they haven't done it. The amount of times, and I can speak from perspective, in the last 2 quarters, we placed probably 6 or 7 people where the client said no to interviews. Obviously, we spent a lot of time with these people, so we could then push back and say, hey, based on our conversation, I think they're worth a discussion. They ultimately hired that person out of a slate of 5 all-star candidates. So it's a good example to show that, if we're going to judge someone off a piece of paper, there's a likelihood you're going to miss out on some of the best talent out there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I guess something in the resume, whether was it like education or was it just the past the skill set that they had?
Yeah, most of the time it's something that's not listed in the resume that they're looking for. And what they have to remember is people don't brand their resume, right? If they're actively looking and they have the time to actually brand it for every opportunity, but most people are applying to so many jobs these days, they don't have the capacity for it. So like they come up with what they think is important on the resume. Because it doesn't have what's important to you doesn't mean they don't have the experience you're looking for. So I
Yeah.
see a lot of companies make assumptions. Another example could be, hey, this person's a job jumper. And we've had a real example of this. And we dive into it with candidates because it is a concern for us. And we had a candidate who'd been at the same company 9 years with 3 different names because it was a private equity owned business that had sold 3 times while they were there. And they survived a lot of layoffs during those acquisitions, which to me told me they're a keeper and they're someone that our client would probably really want if they're holding onto them tightly. So they weren't going to interview them because they saw something and created a narrative that wasn't true versus getting really intellectually curious about it.
Wow. Does that still hold up this day and age? Because I can imagine things are moving so fast. Like people have a lot of jobs throughout their career. And do you really, it seems like it's more frowned upon to be at a company for 20 years versus job hopping. So it,
Job hopping is definitely still a stigma. And I spend a lot of time coaching candidates on being sensitive about how many moves over what time frame. I think it really depends on the client. More modern leaders, I think, look at it a little bit differently because they personally experienced that a little bit more. But it's definitely something that our clients bring up quite a bit. I think at the end of the day, companies hire for certainty. They're never going to get it, but they want certainty that who they hire, they're going to work out. They're going to be someone that they enjoy working with and that they're going to stay for a long time. Nobody wants to make a hire knowing it's, a 12-month deal. So I do think stability tends to make people feel more certain about future stability. That's also not true either. I've seen plenty of people spend 10 years somewhere, hop around 2 or 3 times, a year and a half each, and then they find another company. And it wasn't them. It was just they didn't find the right fit to be with for another 10 years.
right. Like I'm just thinking of my corporate career. I was with the same company for almost 9 years, but I had 3 different roles within that time because put me in one role that would really, I don't know how anyone does it. More power to them.
Exactly.
Well, you said, Mitch, that you guide leaders on that as well. Like, so what do you recommend for them when it comes to job hopping?
Yeah, I mean, I recommend being really diligent about the next move. I actually literally just had a conversation today with someone. They were somewhere for 5 years, somewhere for 9 months, a year and a quarter, and then now a year and 10 months. And I said, and he's in sales. Especially in sales, companies want to see, because if you're in sales for a year, you're not really making impact because the first half of the year is ramping up. So they want someone who's going to be there long enough to create a compounding effect with revenue generation. And I basically told them at this point, you need to stay somewhere at least 3 years. So when you look at the last 10 years of your career, the average stint is much higher than what it is today. I think if you can stay at a company for more than 2 years, 3 is ideal. That's 2 to 3 year stints. That's what we're seeing. Some clients still look at that as job jumping though. But I think the new normal is around a 2.5 to 3 year tenure.
All right, that makes me feel a little better. I mean, because that's not too long. It's long enough to get traction. But yeah, I mean, that the candidate, I'm sure, always has to weigh their best interest, of course. But I'm glad you brought that up because I just wouldn't have thought that was a reality. I've been out of the job market for a while, so that's why you're here. Now, another thing I've done this when I have had, of course, had my own business is trying to, like, you're going, oh crap, I need someone like yesterday, and so it ensues. You're like looking, you're like, yeah, they're good enough, and it ends up being, I know something that I've made a mistake. I've hired the wrong person just because I needed that warm body. How do you recommend new leaders approach that situation? Because they are often, one of the leaders I went through my training, she was underwater. She was overwhelmed and went through a whole process, and the person didn't make the last cut. And then she was back to the drawing board. And you start going like, are we being too difficult on this person? Right? I just need someone in the seat. So what do you recommend them do in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, I always recommend hiring from a place of abundance, not scarcity. go into the hiring process knowing the right person's out there. Don't question it. But if you get to enough really good people that just can't make it through, then it might be the process. And we see that sometimes where clients, again, looking for certainty, find something about everyone. There's no perfect candidate. It's just like dating or marriage, right? Like there's always going to be something or 10% of something that might create challenge. I think coming from a place of abundance, don't just make a hire because you need to, because the wrong hire costs you way more time and money than keeping the search open another 4 to 6 weeks. But also, if you're burning through really good people and there's misalignment, especially among decision makers, this is one that I see where it's not the candidate, it's the client, where you involve too many people, there's too many chefs in the kitchen. Someone will always raise their hand to say no, is what I find. So limiting the decision makers to the most key individuals for that position, and making sure there's alignment amongst them on what we're looking for. Because sometimes every buyer, right, has their own candidate in mind. And sometimes what one person wants actually conflicts with what the other person wants. So I almost advise companies and leaders, take the time up front to really define what your need is and who the person you have in mind is, where they are in their experience from a years of career standpoint, your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, knowing that the more must-haves you have, the harder it's going to be to find someone. And making sure that you don't compromise on quality. I think a lot of companies want to hire for experience and budget. And in doing so, you end up compromising on quality. And those just don't tend to be long-term successful hires from my experience.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there are employers who involve the whole world in an interview, especially the higher they get, then you have to put them all of these stages. And I love what you said about coming up with criteria before you start looking at people to ground it in, fact and what you're actually looking for, and to avoid some of the bias that naturally comes up in hiring. And when you think about that, is there a certain amount of criteria? Because that can go overboard too, right? There's like a whole...
Yeah, I think you can break it down to 4 to 5 key things, right? What does this person need day one to be successful? That's typically what I see work best. More than 5 is too many. Less than 4 is probably too few, unless it's a more junior entry-level position. But I think 4 to 5 key must-haves, key things that they'll need is typically the right amount.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, and it's very tangible for people to take away. I want to go back to what you said earlier about assumptions and, hiring based on resume, exactly what's in the resume versus, it's almost like what you think you can teach them.
Yeah.
So how do you know whether to wait? Because they may not have a Mitch involved who's like, hey, we talked to this person and they're actually really great. You're just kind of looking and maybe having a conversation with them, and you may like them, but how do you not confuse that for, I think they have the ability to learn versus have the skills?
I think it depends on the need and also the budget, because sometimes we get calls where they can't compromise on that. There isn't the leadership above this role to develop that person, so they need someone. And then it becomes a budget question. Can you afford that plug and play person? So I think first, really understanding the need. But the way we look at these things is we interview the person, not the resume. I learn more from candidates by what they ask me than how they answer my questions. So a lot of it is just getting to know, what's important to you. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? Having a good discussion about their career and almost road mapping their career with them, because if you don't aspire for more, you're probably not going to achieve more. If you aspire for more and you have proof of growth in your resume, then you probably have some growth ahead of you still left. So those are kind of things I look at is, what do they value? Do they have aspirations to be a larger leader in the future? And also just energy, getting a feel for how they communicate, who they are. That's a big one. Yeah.
Okay. I've got so many questions. One of them is, so you're not, when you said 5-year plan, I was like, I don't know my 5-year plan, Mitch. If you asked me that, I'd be like, I don't know. So is it less about the actual someone knowing their step by step and more of they want a striver or achiever to something more?
Exactly. You want to know, it's less about even what the plan is. It's just that they have something. They're working towards something personally, not because their leadership team needs them to do something, but because they have a bigger goal for themselves on a personal level of who they want to become in their career.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about this larger role, I also feel like it's a double-edged sword, because if you go into a new role and you're like, yes, I want this role, but I can't wait to have the next role, how honest should people be about that? Because, then they're going to be like, well, they're not going to be sitting in the role very long.
There's a balance. But I think if you're under hiring, right, if we're talking about hiring someone with less experience than what you need, then they have the room to grow into that role. You're essentially hiring them for a promotional opportunity. So they're going to need a lot more tools to even get there. I think if you're hiring a plug and play person and they want to get to the next level and they've been in the same role already for 3 years, then that can be a little bit of a disaster if you don't have the room for growth. But I think if we're hiring down, I'd want to see that they're willing to get their hands dirty, learn what they need to be successful, and that they're coachable and moldable. Because that's another thing too, right? If they have a big ego, if they think they already know everything, it's going to be hard for me to mold them into the role that I'm hiring for.
Yeah, that makes sense. And can their budget afford a plug and play person? And is that who they want to actually be in their organization? Are they looking for that succession planning? Or are they looking for someone just to fill the role and be good with that role for a while?
Yeah. I mean, I always say there's 3 kinds of candidates. There's builders, improvers, and maintainers. Maintainers, they keep the lights on. They keep the ship from sinking by plugging a hole. Improvers take something from A to Z, and builders create from scratch. And I think understanding what you can offer and what you need allows you to even interview better for those kind of 3 archetypes. Because the worst thing you can do is need someone to build and you hire a maintainer. It's never going to work. Or on the contrary, you hire a builder for a maintainer role. They're going to be bored in 12 months and want a bigger challenge and more opportunity. So I also think new leaders should be realistic about what they can actually offer. I find someone's B candidate is someone else's A player. So like, what can you truly offer to attract the kind of talent that you're looking for and also keep them there for a long time?
Yeah. This makes me think of a situation when my first leadership role, they said, hey, you're going to come over, you're going to build this team. You have 2 hires, right? As a brand new leader. And I said, I can't wait. And, it was a higher level band. Like I was already thinking of people I could scope out in the organization. And then they're like, I'm sorry, John. No. We're taking you down like 2 bands. And I had to adjust and I had to say, okay, then they're seeing the role differently than what I had envisioned for it. So I needed to really rethink who I could use in that position. And that did shift the position for me. And it was something I didn't anticipate. It just senior leadership made a call. I needed to roll with it.
Yeah, got to be adaptable for sure.
That's for sure. So also when I was a new leader, I may have tended to hire like me, right? Same background, same experience. And I didn't really realize it until I probably had left the organization. I was like, oh yeah, I kind of did that. So if you were a new leader listening, how do you avoid hiring people just like you, little mini-mes?
Yeah, this is a great question. And we see it especially when new leaders are promoted and then they have to backfill their role because they have a certain perception of who they were and what that role needs. What I find is positions change based on companies changing. Some of the best leaders out there talk about, hire people that are sitting in the room that are smarter than you at the things you're not. The importance of diversity is critical. I mean, if you have a team of people who all have the same beliefs, who all think the same way, nobody's auditing each other or challenging ideas and things that could become critical to the success of the business, or diverse in way of thinking, and that you're hiring people with different skill sets than you, right? Especially as a leader, your job's less of doing the work and more of managing the work through others, inspiring others, being the bridge at the mid-level between the C-level team strategy and executing to achieve the results desired. So, I think to do that successfully, you need to have a team of diverse individuals.
So how do you, obviously if you're seeing it happen, you're like, hey, look, yeah, I'm seeing you trying to backfill your role with people just like you. But what if, like, how would a person even know they're doing it? Like, I didn't know I was doing it. Do you really need someone from the outside or someone internally to say, hey, look, or is it the criteria maybe that you're putting up first?
And that's where I think planning the search really well up front helps, because you can look at it from an unbiased lens of, do they meet the things we're talking about? Do they fit the culture? Do they embody our culture as a person? And then it becomes, can I connect with that person? Less of, are they going to be my best friend? But more of, can we get along and we're going to enjoy working together? And that's where I think having some checks and balances with, like, even with my company, before we hire someone, we do a whole lunch with the team. I want to see them out of an interview setting, out of a workplace. We get more casual. We talk more on a personal level. And it's a way to see how they fit in or not with our team, but also, do they think differently? Are we just adding another person like me on this team? Or are we adding someone that's a culture add, that brings something different into what we're doing as a business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, Mitch, because you're saying you don't want you want everyone to get along, but you don't want everyone to think the same or
You,
agree, right? So do you just make sure you have some kind of dialogue that would bring that out in the team
you
lunches?
can just tell, like, you talk, things come up, you hear things, someone brings up politics, unfortunately, but then you start to see, okay, they have different beliefs. They think differently than some of the people here. It almost, when you start talking on a more personal level, the layers come off where they're trying to please you with what they're saying. And it becomes more of an open conversation, which I find the walls come down, the interview mask comes off, and they start to talk to you on a more person to person level. And I just think it's less of what you ask, but you can just start to pick up on little things if you're paying attention. I don't talk much at those lunches. I let the team talk, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
there paying attention to what they're saying, what the contributions to the conversation are. Do they challenge things? Do they play it safe? Right? These are kind of the things I look for. I can share with you this. My
Mm-hmm.
right-hand person in my business is very opposite from me. We think very, very differently. And she's incredible. And she challenges me in a way that helps me rethink ideas. And I think that's really, really important, because if everyone just agrees with you as a leader, you don't have any checks and balances to make sure you're not driving off a cliff.
Yeah, that's a great point. And whoever the brave soul is that would talk politics at
I
an interview lunch,
know.
more power to them. I can't even imagine.
I know.
um, so we all would have heard from a lot of people. Heard it two different ways. Like, so you interview someone and they ace the interview and then they're just not a good job fit. And then I've seen it the flip side where they're so nervous and like they just don't do well in the interview. And then it questions, can they actually do the job? So let's take the first scenario. If you ace an interview, what should people be looking for in an interview? And maybe it's just what you said, it's not just doing an interview, it's also outside of the interview, how do you interact with them? But that was a long way of saying, how much do you trust the actual interview, and how do
Yeah.
you get outside of it?
I'm very passionate about interviewing because I think it's something that can be done very wrong. Um, that's one of our big differentiators is we do what I call a reverse interview. We make it about the candidate. We don't make it about us. And I just put some content on LinkedIn out about this, because a lot of times companies want to interrogate, right? They want to get certainty by asking a lot of specific questions. They tell them what they're looking for in advance, which I always advise people not to do. A lot of times we see interviewers, especially new and emerging leaders, like, they get nervous for interviews because it's also new for them. And there can be a component of imposter syndrome where we see them tell the candidate what they're looking for almost immediately. Here's what our needs are. Here's a position. Here's what we're looking for. Well, great. You just gave the candidate all the answers to the test. So I actually make it about the candidate. I get to know them. I learn more from people's questions in an interview than answers, because their answers are prepared. Their questions might not be as prepared. The questions show you what they truly value at the deeper level. If money's the first question they ask in the whole interview, that's probably pretty important to them, right? It's not a negative thing, not always, but it can be. And it could be a cultural misalignment too. So I normally start the interviews actually by asking them, hey, I'm sure you did your research, just to get started, like anything I can answer for you, anything you'd like to know about the role, our company. And it catches people off guard a little bit. So it's kind of an opportunity to see, especially for us, right? Recruiters and salespeople, you want to see that they think quickly on their feet. They can handle a surprise with a customer or candidate. So it's a way that I can kind of do that in a scenario to see, are they prepared? Do they actually have questions? Does it rattle them? But then I get to learn a lot about them based on their questions. But I always ask open-ended. I peel the layers back. I look for stories. I don't ask yes or no. Hey, have you done this? Do you have experience with that? I'll say, are you familiar with this? Tell me about, your work with this tool. And then I start asking more and more and more questions. It's about line 2, line 3, line 4 questions. So that's where the 4 to 5 critical components come into play. If you have 10 things on your list, you're going to run through. You're not going to be able to go as deeply on those important things because you're not going to have time. But I hit the 4 to 5 points and I go deep. I ask for stories. I ask for specific examples. And you can peel the layers back to get real, true substance and evidence versus, a surface line, yes or a no.
Mm-hmm. Are you ever concerned when someone doesn't have any questions? Like they're like, nope, I'm good. Is that ever a concern for you?
Always a concern for me, because I want to know that they're intrigued enough that it sparked curiosity. Yeah, I want to know that they're interested. If you don't have questions, it means you're just, in my opinion, it makes me feel like you're just looking for a job. This isn't a career move. This isn't, the career is not as important. It's just a way to pay your bills. And there's people like that, which is fine. That's just not who we are as a company or the culture we're building. So I think, not having anything prepared to me just shows me a lack of genuine interest.
Yeah. And I think it's the best way for, if a candidate is asking questions, it's the best way to find out if it's truly a good culture fit, because they can answer it. And, they're going to, sometimes organizations can tell you what you want to hear. Oh, yes, we do all this work-life balance, all that. But then when you truly ask the right questions, you can really get at, is that true or not? So they should be asking questions.
Yeah, I think the most valuable candidates qualify the company equally as much as they qualify them, because they know their value. They know they're looking for the right. If they're not qualifying me, it makes me question how long-term of a decision this is for them, how important it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, versus I just need a job right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So, explained my situation earlier when I was hiring, and then it got switched on me, right? So the band level of the candidate I could hire. But there are some times where this actually happened to one of my new leaders I was training. She was like, I like this candidate, but the senior leaders, who is a small firm, didn't think that she answers this question, so she was out. So how does a new manager handle that, where they want to go one way but they get overruled basically?
Yeah, I think it comes down to who's the buyer, right? And that's where you can set this up front. Like, do I have hiring authority? If we disagree, but I'm really confident, do you have the trust in me to make this decision? And if it doesn't work, then we'll figure it out. And the answer could be no, right? But I would want to know that up front, because then there's no misexpectation. I think Jeff Bezos has this amazing line about Amazon called disagree and commit. And he says some of the best things Amazon's implemented, he's disagreed with, but enough people in the room felt strongly about it that he goes, hey, I don't see it this way, but if you want to go for it, let's run with it. And I think in the best hiring processes have some element of that. And I think the best way to do it is up front. I've seen this happen on a search. It was a long search because the client wasn't aligned. There were 5 decision makers, the whole C-suite, and almost everyone had a different opinion. At the very end, we got to a candidate where 4 out of 5 of them, including the CEO and owner, were all in. One person said no, and I'll never forget this. he basically said, hey, this isn't my hire. It doesn't report to me. I have my concerns. But if everyone else feels that this is the right person, then I'm for it. But if you're asking me, I personally would not bring this person on. So I think that's a really noble way to approach leadership. And I think even leaders that are emerging that are going to be involved in hiring processes should have that lens too, of releasing attachment that, everyone's going to have a little bit of a different opinion, but also listen, because, if it's a small firm and this person's the owner, they have a lot more experience than you do. So I would use that as almost a learning opportunity. I would get really curious to know why, what stood out. To me, if you weren't interviewing this person, we would already given them an offer. So help me understand the concerns and reservations that you have and where they came up in the interview for you, because it could be assumptions, right? It gives you an opportunity to combat some of the reservations, but it can also be a learning opportunity for things that maybe you missed.
Yeah, that's really smart. Just thinking about getting curious. Yeah, because like you said, if you're a new leader, you've only seen what you've seen, and someone else may have a different perspective. But also getting back to that,
Yeah.
who is the decision maker at the end? That's a brilliant way just to
Yeah.
avoid that from the beginning, to know what your power is in it. And it also made me think, Mitch, is that emerging leaders, if you're not quite a leader, and you're maybe part of, they're hiring for your team, how can you get involved and just see what it looks like, right? Kind of step into it when you're not the one actually hiring, could be good experience.
I think it's the best way to do it. Yeah. Yeah. You get experience without the risk, and you can kind of look at the interviews differently because you're not biased based on your own fears of making the wrong hire.
Yes. And, I don't want to get too in the weeds on this one, because it almost falls into onboarding, right? And I really want to stick to hiring here, but let's just say a new leader is like, yes, we've got the candidate. What should new leaders make sure they do maybe in their first week, their first day, to make sure their new hire feels like they can be successful in that role?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. I think if you're doing the traditional onboarding, you're setting this person up for success. I think really getting to know them on a personal level, building that kind of trust, safety, and relationship can go miles. Because if things aren't working or if things get hard, that they feel safe to give you feedback, to come with questions. If they are the right person, I think the personal relationship allows them to be retained for a lot longer, because it's not a transactional employment experience. It's something they feel connected to. I think great leaders, if it's done right, if their direct reports are being recruited by a firm like me and they get an offer and they weren't looking, that relationship should be a factor if they do it really well. Like, they don't want to leave that leader because of the trust and rapport and relationship they built. Doesn't mean they'll always stay, but it's not just a transactional employment experience, it's personal. And I think those relationships are best built in those first few weeks. And it can go a long way in the success of that relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, they may not stay, but maybe they'll tell you if they're looking to leave, right? Or they're like when they
Yeah.
leave, right? It'll be a nice parting. And I think sometimes new leaders can get so caught up on having every little thing in place, which is nice to have, but the relationship can be forgotten. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I think that's a vital piece. So, Mitch, let's just say you're going to have some coffee tomorrow morning with an early leader who has to make a hiring decision. They've got an open spot on their team. So what would you urge them to consider?
Yeah. I would get them to consider, you'll never have certainty. I think that's a big thing, because you never will. Everyone's always looking for it. And those are the things I see where you miss out on the right person. And then you go back 3 months later wishing you could get them back, but they already took another job. Knowing that you're never going to have certainty and that some hires just aren't going to work. Just understanding the reality of hiring, because I think we all want to go in and say we're never going to hire the wrong person. We're going to have an all-star team. It's just not true, but also not letting those mishires, I guess, shift your perspective of people. It's something I see a lot of people make where they're hardened through bad employees, bad hires. but just accepting it as something that's just part of being a leader and knowing that it's going to happen. And again, hiring from a place of abundance versus scarcity, really putting the trust out there, knowing that the right people do exist, don't settle, and never compromise on quality.
Yes. Good advice. Certainty has come through as a thread quite frequently. I think it's a very interesting. I've never thought about just hiring and the lack of certainty and how people really want certainty, but they don't get it. I think I've never really made those ties. So I'm glad you did. Probably freaks a lot of people out. You just never know. Well, Mitch, where can people find out more about you and your company?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's a great place. Mitch McDermott, Talent Ascension Group, our website also can be another good place. But LinkedIn is where I'm putting a lot of content out to help leaders, help companies out there, and bringing some of these topics that we've talked about to life, because I think the world's changing a lot. And what the future of leadership looks like is going to be very different than what it's looked like for the past 30, 40 years.
Yes, absolutely. I'll link all of those up in the show notes. All right. Well, Mitch, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.